Welcome to Unleash Learning TV, helping you and your learning community boost student engagement and unlock consistent and effective teaching. Now, if you truly want to unleash learning for all the students that you work with, who students are matters. And any way we can help bring out the best in who they are helps in the ways we get learning to be unleashed for them. And that's why this episode is so important. Now, Susie Mogg is the founder of Resilience in Kids, and she's passionate about helping give students the skills and coping strategies to strengthen their resilience. Now, in this episode, she's going to share with you some ways to think about resilience, and she's going to offer you some practical tips that you and your entire learning community can use to help make this happen. So I can't wait to get started. Okay. So welcome.
Thank
welcome,
you.
welcome, welcome.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'm really excited you're here because I think it's a really important conversation, who our students are and how to bring out the best in our students. So Susie, would you help us out and give us a definition before we have the whole conversation? How do you define resiliency?
So I define resiliency as responding with confidence to challenges. There are hundreds of definitions out there, but it's essentially about experiencing some form of adversity and then responding to that in an appropriate way. So adversity is defined as a hardship or a difficult or unpleasant situation. And that kind of exists on a spectrum. So you've got your low-level adversity, so being pushed around a bit in the playground, maybe not wanting to step up for fear of making a mistake, and then you've got the big adversity at the other end. We're not talking trauma here, but we're talking moving into state or maybe the death of a loved one. The great thing about resilience is that it has been broken down into a set of skills, so it can now be learned. So even us adults can develop that important skill of resilience. No one is resilient all the time. Just because we've responded with resilience once to a situation doesn't necessarily mean that we will do again. You probably hear a lot of people talk about bounce back. I personally don't love that term. Yes, of course, it's about experiencing a challenge and then, hopefully getting back to a similar state as before, but kind of suggests that we stay static, and in my mind we're always evolving and growing and changing, so it's actually not physically possible to move back to the same state that we were in before. But Sheryl Sandberg, in her book Option B, which she wrote after the tragic passing of her late husband, coined the term bouncing forward. And at Resilience in Kids, that's the term that we really like to use, that you experience adversity, you learn and you grow, you flex that resilience muscle, and then you bounce forward and reach an even stronger state than the one you were in before. So a positive way of looking at things.
I think you almost answered it, but I do want to ask, because I know people watching are thinking, I've got so much on my plate. Why are we talking about one more thing for my classroom? So why, as educators, as schools, because we work with whole schools, why should we be thinking about the ways we support our students thinking about and learning about their own resiliency?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I hear that a lot from teachers too. So we are all members of the community, so I feel like we all have a responsibility to do this. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that resilient kids do better at school. They get better academic outcomes. And I've heard plenty of stories of the child in the playground that's crying because they've had a blow up with a friend, or they're feeling emotionally unhappy about something, or they can't sleep at night because they've got worries. If those issues are kind of dealt with or handled, they're much more likely to be able to concentrate on maths or science or whatever it is that comes later. And resilient kids are mentally more healthy, they're generally happier, and they also behave better in class. They don't act out as much. So I think there's a huge amount in it for teachers.
Makes me think, because a lot of times the conversation's about student motivation or behavior, but it might be something underneath that about the resiliency and helping students have a framework to keep stepping up and leaning in or bouncing forward. I love that term.
Yeah, absolutely. We encourage all our coaches to try and look behind the behaviour to see what's sitting behind it, and then typically once you've nailed that, the behaviour just falls into place.
So the next question I've got is, in our episodes we've talked about growth mindset. We've interviewed Dr. Susie Green and Daniela Fleckie about mental toughness. We've talked a lot of stuff about positive psychology, positive education. Where does this fit in those conversations, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, and they're all very interwoven and interlinked. In my mind, resilience is a really broad topic, and the more you research it and the more you read about it, the more you realise actually it's bigger than you thought. I see mental toughness and positive psychology and growth mindset all fitting underneath that broader umbrella of resilience. And we have a resilience framework that's got 8 pillars, and they are the behaviours that we develop in kids when we work with them, and we have one for parents as well. And all of those concepts kind of fit in within that. So we have a pillar around perseverance and keeping going when things get tough, which would be the mental toughness concept. We have a lot in there around the growth mindset and moving from that fixed to that growth mindset, the Carol Dweck work, and then there's a huge amount from the PERMA model, Martin Seligman's PERMA model, so positive education and engagement, and relationships is a really big one. Meaning, and then achievements. We talk a lot about giving kids independence and that real sense of accomplishment. So it all kind of fits in together. It's a very
it just reminds me about,
but they're big topics. I guess the one thing I would say is we try and caution people from moving away from using the word tough too much, particularly in the Australian context, because we talk a lot about tough enough princess and grow a pair, and it's often not seen as being congruent with vulnerability, which is a really big part in my mind of being able to show resilience and express those all important emotions that we all have as human beings.
That's a great framework to understand the literacy of this work. I mean, so I do want to ask you this question. We talked earlier about it. And, a lot of equity leaders, people in social inclusion and social justice and multicultural education are really pushing back around conversations about grit and resiliency, because often it's applied to sometimes low-income communities or kids of color or kids where there's not resources for the school and we just need grit. But really what they need is resources. We need to combat racism. We need to really look at the context of what's happening at that school, not grit or resiliency. So what would you say in that conversation? What would you talk about for resiliency? Why do we still need that even in the face of all of that?
Yeah, look, I think that there are a base set of tools and strategies that are valuable for all kids, regardless of their context. But that said, this is a really complex area, and the process of building resilience is one that's influenced by so many different factors. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. There is no silver bullet. What works well for one child doesn't necessarily work well for another child. You can have interventions at different levels. So I do believe there is a place for universal interventions at a sort of population level, and then more targeted interventions at the next level down. So your lower socioeconomic groups would potentially have those. But there's also a place for individual interventions. So, you talk about that low socioeconomic group. Within that group, each of those children will require different things to help them respond with confidence to challenges. Now, to your point about, they don't have enough resources, we need to combat racism, absolutely, I could not agree more, and we need to throw as many resources to that as possible. Kids in low socioeconomic areas, research has shown that they are more likely to experience adversity for more longer periods of time. So yeah, we need to try and get rid of those things, but there has been a lot of research into whether it's better to remove the adversity or it's better to develop the resilience. And I think, the research shows it is better to remove the adversity where you can, but it's nigh on impossible to do that. So if you can't do that, let's at least give these kids the skills that they need to be able to, respond with confidence to those challenges when they do come their way.
So we need a context for what we're doing to really not just go in as a Band-Aid and say, there's a bigger conversation going on here and this fits within that grand conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need both at the same time.
Pardon me, I'm interrupting. So the question I've got is, so give us some practical tips. So if I'm a teacher or I'm a school leader, I'm an instructional leader, what are some ways, knowing how much is on my plate, that I can help my students learn how to be a little bit more resilient or to lean into the resiliency they already have? So what would you say? A couple of tips that we can maybe think about to give it a boost.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and there is a huge amount that teachers can do, so I'm obviously not going to go into all of that. I do think there's a place for this in the curriculum, social and emotional learning, but that's obviously a longer term play. For me, I talk a lot about connection. So we talk about connection being your superpower, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher. And there are some pretty simple things that you can do that really don't take any extra time. So really connecting with all of your students, eye contact. Hello, how's it going? Really observing them. And if there's one thing you can do, it's show empathy. I think empathy is one of the most powerful tools on this earth, whether it's with your kids, whether it's with your partner, whether it's with your colleagues at work. Just show them some empathy, and oh my, it can diffuse the most highly charged situations with children. Really show interest with them, I think engage with them and show that they have been heard and seen by you. And I really think that could be game changing. It sounds pretty simple and pretty basic, but
well, it's a reminder about what the work is about, because most people didn't enter the profession to get through a test. They got through the profession to really unleash learning for people, and you're saying that those connections matter, the empathy matters, the connection between the teacher and a student matters. And so it's a reminder to keep leaning in at a time when there's so much on our plate that those things matter. And we teach that in the Unleashed Learning System. We show the modeling of that, how to do exactly just that.
Yeah.
So it's perfect timing for our question. We can go on and on about this. I think we all need that. I could learn more resiliency. I know teachers, we all probably can go, I need to learn these frameworks. So we've got a question for you, and the question is this. So what does your school, or what do you do in your classroom to help support the resiliency in your school? We know there's tons of stuff going out there, positive psychology, positive education. You've got lots of stuff going on. We'd love to know what you're already doing that's supporting the resiliency of your students. Even the littlest act might be a great inspiration for people in the audience. So as always, the best conversations take place in the comments section, so fill that out. Also, if you don't have it, you can grab our free ebook, The Ultimate Classroom Setup Guide. That's going to take some things off your plate, so you've got room for these really, really important questions. So Susie, really appreciate your time. The reason I want you is I really respect the work you're doing. Thank you so much for bringing it into the grand conversation of our profession. Thank you. As always, we are cheering you on. This is never about perfection. It's about leaning forward. Let's bouncing forward. Yeah. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Susie.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye.